You're listening to Twins Takes, the Minnesota Twins podcast.
And welcome into Twins Takes. I'm Twin Central, joined by Troy tonight. Twins Insider and Falvey's Mattress are unable to join us. Troy, how are you doing? We finally have some regular season baseball games that count to talk about.
Yeah, finally. And I think it's a lot to talk about, honestly. But as we transition into the news.
Breaking news.
Well, I got some bad news for you.
Extra.
Good news, everyone.
It's time for the news.
So, as everybody knows, the Twins went 1-2 in Baltimore, winning the middle game and dropping both opening day and the rubber match of the series. Royce Lewis headlined the performances on the hitting side with a 2-homer series after being pinch hit for, which I'm sure we'll get into a bit later on opening day. Trevor Larnach ended the game. Kalen Culpepper, who started this season with St. Paul and is going to be under a giant microscope, especially with the poor performance of Brooks Lee through three games, hit a homer for St. Paul on Saturday. And the Saints did sweep the series. I'm not sure who they were playing. It was just a 3-game set, but they did win all 3 games. We've talked about it a little bit. The Saints should be really, really good, at least until those prospects start getting called up. And then the Twins made another minor league signing, which I think Troy could talk to us about.
Yeah, so the Twins signed Drew Smith to a minor league deal, and he actually did pitch today for the Saints. He gave up a hit, walked a batter, but didn't allow anybody to score, so a clean first inning for 32-year-old right-hander, formerly of the Mets, and he's a guy that was pretty steady in the Mets rotation bullpen hierarchy for a couple of years, but just got phased out as the Mets bullpen got better. He hasn't pitched in 2 years, sat out all of 2025, but he's an interesting flyer, I think, at least to watch for the Twins, as you know, as we anticipate this bullpen to probably be really bad this year. We could see this Smith up sooner rather than later.
Yeah, Smith is a guy who has pretty good stuff. Like you mentioned, he missed last year with an injury, which has been an issue for him. He threw 56 innings in 2023, but then only 17.2 in 2024. He was good in those years. He has a career 3.48 ERA in 164 games, 168.1 innings. So I think he's a guy that you can envision getting the middle innings if everything goes well. He is 32 years of age. But I think you look at Cody Lawyerson, who's yet to appear, Zach Kent, who has yet to appear in the opening 3 games of the Twins season. He's a guy you can get up here and actually hand the ball to and have a little bit of faith in say, the 5th, 6th inning if the start goes a little bit short.
Yeah, he's a guy that I think, you know, we talked about John Brebbia a little bit. Brebbia couldn't even make the Colorado Rockies bullpen, which is a pretty concerning sight. But, you know, Smith is, I think, much better depth as a guy that has produced in the past and, you know, is coming off an injury, but he's ready to show why he was a decently valuable reliever for a couple of years with the Mets. But we're going to transition anyways into breaking down the Twins' overall series against the Orioles. Game 1 specifically, the Twins lost 2-1. And I think the first thing I want to bring up is going 1 for 12 for runners in scoring position. The one hit was an infield hit that didn't even advance the runner. It was just a really frustrating day on offense for the quote unquote new look lineup. And especially with just runners in scoring position, this has been an issue for this team for the past few years. But on Thursday, it was just really frustrating to watch.
Yeah, I tweeted out during the game when they kept failing with guys in scoring position that if you couldn't catch today's game, you'll be able to rewatch this another 50 times throughout the season, so you didn't miss too much. Unfortunately, it's just something that we've seen time after time with this current core of hitters being Buxton, Jeffers, and so on, Wallner. They just don't get guys in when guys are in scoring position. 1 for 12 was the microcosm of that game. If they even just get 2 or 3 hits, they win that game with ease. They got the performance out of Joe Ryan that they expected and needed, but the hitting just let them down, which I think is probably going to be a fairly common theme this year.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you on that front. And the bullpen honestly is also a big topic of concern. We brought up a lot, but honestly, overall in the series, as we'll talk about, they weren't even that bad. They only gave up 2 earned runs total, and both of them came in this game from one charge to Cody Funderburk and the other to Justin Topa. But really, I don't really blame much on them because your offense couldn't even produce. You leave that many men on base, then it's hard to blame the pitching on that front. So the Twins losing that one was tough, but luckily they did bounce back the next day yesterday on Saturday with a 4-1 win.
Yeah, before we move on to game 2, I did want to talk about that Austin Martin play in left field, which was a big error by him. A ball was hit to left field with a guy with runners on the corners. I don't remember if there was 0 out or 1 out, but regardless, it doesn't matter. The ball was hit down the foul line. You think 0 outs? Okay. Regardless, the ball was hit down the line, and he caught it and kind of half-assed the ball back into the field. But the issue was he threw it to third base, which allowed the runner on first to tag up the second. And the ball wasn't hit deep or anything. I mean, he probably didn't run back on it. It was more running side, and he half-assed into the infield, like I said. The runner on first made a heads-up, tagged the second, later would come around to score on a single. And that ended up being the difference in the ball game. Again, so if you're making a pie chart of blame, I think you maybe put 10% on the bullpen, 20, 25% on Austin Martin, and then the rest is on the lineup for just not coming through time after time. We should talk about the lineup a little bit on opening day. It was against a lefty in Trevor Rogers. Austin Martin led off, played left field. How surprised were you with Martin in the leadoff spot?
No, I'm not really shocked. I wasn't really shocked by that decision. He was, Derek Shelton said that on the lineup on the last spring training game last Tuesday that was going to be the same 9. And again, it's against a lefty. So it doesn't shock me. I think Austin Martin's going to get a lot of time against left-handed hitters this season. We'll see if he hits them well or not. But, as one of the only guys that will be kind of on the bench and starting as the only right-handed hitter, really, basically, because we'll talk about this bench construction a bit later, but, he's going to get a lot of at-bats. And then, you'll still have – the issue is you'll still have about 2 other left-handed hitters that shouldn't really be taking a lot of at-bats against lefties. But at the same time, it doesn't really shock me that they had him first. But also Victor Caratini and Ryan Jeffers were both in the lineup. Vic Caratini was at first, Josh Bell DH'd, and Royce Lewis hit 8th. And that was also a common trend we saw in the lineups. And really all weekend, Derek Shelton didn't really mix up the lineup. The makeup of the lineup was basically the same. He swapped some guys around, and Cody Clemens hit lead off the next 2 games. But pretty much the idea of the lineup was the same.
Yeah, the guys that were in there all 3 games primarily hit in the same spot, whether it was against a lefty or righty. And like you said, they just swapped out the guys, whether it was a lefty or a righty on the mound. The Royce Lewis thing hitting 8th is probably worth talking about a little bit. Again, lineup construction is one of those things that fans and media think matters more than it actually does. But him hitting 8th is interesting. And again, this is the game he was pinch hit for against Ryan Helsley. In the 9th inning, Trevor Larnach would end up striking out to end the game. How surprised were you first that he hit 8th and second that he was pinch hit for by Trevor Larnach?
No, I'm not really surprised that he hit 8th. I think Lewis is kind of a player has to kind of build his way up in the lineup. At least that's what I think Derek Shelton wants him to do. And, he didn't budge from that 8th spot, interestingly enough, the next few games. But I think Lewis hitting 8th at least gives them some juice in the bottom of the lineup if I'm thinking about it. But, realistically, Lewis is a guy that should be hitting 5th or 6th, I think, in an ideal lineup. No matter how struggling if he's struggling or not, he's a player that's at least, I think, worth moving up a couple spots. And hopefully in the next few games against Kansas City, he can bump up the lineup as they're facing a lefty. And he's a righty playing third base. And pinch hitting him for Trevor Larnach in the 9th, I think it was just matchup dependent. Larnach usually hits those kind of pitchers traditionally well. It didn't come to be as Helsley really brought his best stuff that day. So I'm not necessarily shocked considering how poor Lewis looked in the first game at least, but he redeemed himself the next 2.
Yeah, we'll talk about it in a little bit. There were some people on Twitter that I saw, I don't know if complaining is the right word, but they said that this could ruin, Royce's confidence or things of that nature. I strongly disagree with that. The goal is to win the game. If the manager thinks that Trevor Larnach, who his one redeeming quality is he hits fastballs pretty well, which Ryan Helsley was touching triple digits both appearances, that's the ideal matchup that you want him in. So I had no issue with the move. It didn't work, and there is a pinch hitting penalty because guys have been sitting on the bench for however many innings before they come in. But I think the move is defensible on the manager. Now let's move on to game 2, a 4-1 victory. Taj Bradley was impressive in this one. 4.1 innings pitched, allowed 1 run on 3 hits, walked 3, and struck out 9. He wasn't very efficient, but he did get 15 whiffs. in the start. What were your takeaways from Taj Bradley's season opening appearance?
Yeah, like you mentioned, he wasn't very efficient, but we'll talk about another similar pitcher outing in Game 3. But Taj was able to at least finish hitters, and it was hard for this Orioles lineup to catch up to his fastball, which he touched 100 once, and he really had command with the fastball. If he hit the corner, that was a couple. He hit it a couple of times, and you know that if you're if you're a guy like me who is at least expecting something from Taj Bradley, it's a really encouraging outing. He just again was not efficient enough. You wish that he could finish 5 innings, get through the lineup fully through the lineup twice, but I think it's encouraging nonetheless. The fastball looks really lively. He still has to really work on command issues with his secondary pitches, but overall, it's at least encouraging to take away, I think, from him.
Yeah, it was about as encouraging of a start that you can have, especially in Game 1 of the season for him. He wasn't efficient. The first inning, he really, really labored, and then he got better as things progressed. But when you rack up a ton of strikeouts, your pitch count is going to go high because very rarely are you just going to strike a guy out on 3 or 4 pitches. There's going to be some foul balls mixed in, and you're obviously going to throw some balls in there. So that causes pitch count to climb. And he is a guy traditionally that doesn't throw a ton of innings. His career high was last year. He threw 142. Of course, he did add probably 10 to 20 more in AAA. But in his career, he only has 400 innings over. Now he's in his 4th season in the majors. So it's not a surprise that he labored a little bit. And again, it was a very good outing. The bullpen also was effective, 4.2 scoreless innings. And we saw Shelton have his first chance to mix and match. He went with Bonda originally to get out of Taj Bradley's when he left in the 5th, followed by Funderburk, Orsi, Topa, and Sands. Did you have any big takeaways on the hierarchy of how he used his guys in Game 2?
Yeah, it's interesting. He did use both lefties in this game, Bonda and Funderburk. Then he went to Eric Orsi for an inning and third, Topa and Sands. I did predict on a previous podcast that Cole Sands would get the first save of the year, and he did. And what's really impressed me about the Pen is that they got 7 strikeouts. The pitching staff overall got 16. And really outside of that first inning where Bradley labored a bit, they were really the Orioles never really threatened. I wasn't necessarily worried that the Orioles were going to put a big inning in, which is kind of weird considering my thoughts on the Pen before this year. And they were just effective in what you want a bullpen to do: get the job done, limit runners on the base paths, and they did that. They did that really well, and really was also aided by Royce Lewis hitting that 2-run home run in the 5th inning over that really just ridiculous long left field at Camden Yards. It was really good to see Royce get that home run off the bat because, again, as people have been whining about his spot in the order, it was nice that he was up in that spot in the 5th, and he just got he got all of that, was able to elevate that ball on the left. Again, just really encouraging to see what Lewis did on that play.
Yeah, it was good to see him follow that up after getting pinch hit for the day prior. The other interesting thing out of this game, and obviously we'd learn more about it in the post game, Cody Clemens hit leadoff. This is something that I posted on Twitter. He had a 286 OBP against right-handed pitchers last year. And listen, I like Cody Clemens as a player. I think he's a useful piece on this team, but I strongly disagree with hitting a guy with a sub 300 OBP at leadoff. I think the thinking is like he can provide that Buxton X power out of the leadoff spot, that he can start some games off 1-0 for you. But I just like a guy that can get on base a little bit more, especially when you have Buxton and Keishel hitting behind him. Those are 2 guys that want to wreak havoc on the base paths. Cody Clemens, although he did have a steal today, isn't a guy that's going to steal many bases, I don't think. So that's the other thing that makes me question that. And listen, this team, if you're not going to hit Buxton or Keishel leadoff, doesn't have like a guy that you look at and go, okay, put this guy lead off. So he is kind of between a rock and a hard place. But what were your thoughts on the decision to hit Clemens number 1?
Yeah, it was interesting. And I'm kind of a guy that, likes kind of a power speed mix at the top of the lineup, although, Cody Clemens isn't exactly that. I'm wondering if they'll try to experiment at the top of the lineup. Obviously, Austin Martin's the kind of guy that you want on base because he can steal. But what about I don't know, this just is adjustment to me. What about putting guys like Larnach or Wallner near the top of the order? I know Wallner has hit leadoff in the past before, and that was an interesting experiment. I don't know. I can't find the statistics on that, but it would just be interesting to me to see how they would how they would construct the lineup if, say, a guy like Warner was leadoff. But this just suggests, and I doubt they do it, but it's interesting nonetheless. I really am just a guy though that more likes a guy like Martin at the top of the lineup because he is more of a traditional leadoff bat.
Yeah, I think the issue is Martin just isn't going to play that much against right-handed pitching, so he's not really going to be an option. And maybe the thought is you leave these other guys kind of pigeonholed into their spots, and then you just swap out Clemens or Martin, and those are your leadoff hitters, whether a lefty or righty is on the mound. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was in the middle of the game, the Orioles went to a left-handed reliever, old friend Dietrich Enns. Larnach and Clemens both saw him in that appearance. Austin Martin was available off the bench and did not get off the bench to pinch hit for either of them. I think it's safe to say if Rocco was still managing the Twins, one of those guys would have been subbed out in favor of the right-handed hitter. How surprised were you that, first of all, Shelton let those two see the lefty, and second off, Cody Clemens did come through with an RBI base hit single?
Yeah, it was clutch from Clemens, and that's something that gave him that insurance run. I don't really have a lot of thoughts on it because I think that in that moment, Shelton was at least confident in a guy like Cody coming through. I think Cody was, at least in that moment, due for a hit, and he got it. And it was thanks to Royce Lewis stealing a base in that one, which was also interesting that Lewis isn't a guy that doesn't have a ton of speed. So seeing him steal and beat it out pretty easily was nice. I think it will mainly be matchup dependent because Dietrich Enns doesn't exactly throw the hardest stuff in the world. So, and we'll talk about it a little bit in the next game because they did pinch hit, I believe, today when a different lefty was in for the Orioles, but he throws a lot harder than Grant Wolfram. So I think it's really matchup dependent and really on the flow of the game. And I think Shelton was going by that, and he he trusted Clemens, and he came through in that spot. So it paid off. I'm not sure if it's a good strategy, but in that moment, it worked out.
Yeah, like you said, there was a pinch hitter today. Actually, two of them. Martin pinch hit for Larnach, and then later Outman pinch hit for Martin. But we'll talk about that in just a minute. Like I just mentioned, Game 3 today, the series finale, wound up a 6-8 defeat for the Twins. The Twins got off to a hot start, taking a 4-0 lead before the Orioles responded with five unanswered of their own before Royce Lewis tied it up, but then Mick Abel struggled in the piggyback role. Tristan Gray, we saw make his first start in a Twins uniform. The broadcast did mention that this was a planned day off for Brooks Lee. I think the thinking is, as we're going to talk about in a little bit, the Royals are going to start three lefties. You're not going to want to start Tristan Gray against a lefty, and you want to get guys in there in this first series, so it makes sense to go to Gray. And he did pay off in a big way, 4 RBIs. Victor Caratini also got his first start behind the dish, and Cody Clemens, again, was at leadoff. I think the other lineup takeaway that we can talk about here, Josh Bell started his third consecutive day at DH, this time Cody Clemens at first base. Do you think that, I know they mentioned that Bell would see some first base, and certainly he will at some point, but do you think we're in for like a 70-80% Josh Bell at DH when he's in the lineup this year?
I think we will. And, Bell had a really good game today. He got on base on most of his at-bats, but we'll also talk about a big mistake he made. But, Bell's a guy that has traditionally not been great at first base, so it doesn't surprise me they just plug him in at DH. Plug him in at DH, write him in even before a day starts. But the Twins traditionally have also made first baseman the last few years. Think about Ty France and Carlos Santana, who historically are good fielders, but you can, at least the Twins have always gotten serviceable first base defense. I know that's not the most important defensive position in the field, but it's interesting to note. And Caratini saw a couple innings at first base as well this series. So I think they're going to mix and match a lot with guys like Clemens, Caratini, Bell, kind of in a rotation at first base, just see who really sticks. I think, to me, just put the best guy that can at least field a ground ball hit to him. But, I think they'll switch it up a bit. Josh Bell will primarily see DH, and I think you mentioned it in a previous podcast. He'll play basically almost every day unless he's hurt, unless it's a planned off day. He's going to get a lot of at-bats this season, whether we like it or not. That's just how the nature of this roster is built, I think.
Yeah, and I do think one thing that we haven't talked about, if Clemens or Caratini are going to be in the lineup, which at least one of them is going to be almost every game along with Bell, especially Caratini, you're going to want Caratini in the field, because if something happens to Jeffers and Caratini has to go behind the plate, you don't lose your DH. Say you have Bell at first base and Caratini at DH, and Caratini needs to go catch. Then you lose that DH. So that's another small, minute detail that Shelton and people on his staff are probably thinking of. And he's also just a better defender than Josh Bell. Bell is probably the worst defender on this team. Maybe Trevor Larnach has an argument for that. But the big takeaway today, Bailey Ober, who we knew was going to start, pitched to open the game. And then Mick Abel, who we didn't know was going to get in, followed him up. Both guys struggled a little bit. Ober's velo was around 90, which I know was kind of the number that people were targeting, but I think that was kind of false hope. He averaged 90.3 last year and had an ERA of 5 over 5. So I think the number we're really looking for from Ober is more that 92 mile an hour. He was up a little bit from spring training, but gave up that big home run to Tyler O'Neill to pull the Orioles back within striking distance. What were your overall takeaways on Bailey Ober's first start of the season?
Yeah, I think it was, a traditional Ober start if he went the 5 or 6 innings, but obviously, they're kind of holding him back a bit, I think, because he did have a slow ramp up, didn't start spring training immediately. So this makes sense to me. And one thing to note, with the Twins having an off day Tuesday and the weather in Kansas City not being ideal, I think they could afford to have Mick Abel piggyback, and then maybe we see him start a week from now. But it makes it, if you thought about it for a couple of seconds and anticipate what the weather is going to be in Kansas City, and it's not 100% that they're going to play on Wednesday and Thursday, then this decision I think makes sense. But we also have to mention about Mick Abel is that he just didn't pitch well. Unlike Taj Bradley, where Bradley was able to finish innings, was able to strike hitters out, Mick Abel got into a lot of 2-strike counts and then just couldn't finish hitters. And Glenn Perkins on Twins TV said during the broadcast that Abel was up 0-2 or 1-2 on an Orioles hitter 5 times, and all those times Orioles reached base. Just interesting. What do you want to see out of Abel, at least in polishing this part of his game up?
Yeah, so Abel's performance today was basically a perfect encapsulation of what prospect evaluators have said about him as he's rose through the ranks in the Philly system and now in a Twins uniform. He's a guy that has good stuff, but he doesn't have great command, doesn't have great control, and he doesn't always put hitters away. He did finish today with 4 strikeouts, but he also had 4 walks, gave up 8 hits in just 3 1/3 innings. The hits are something that aren't always going to be there. He's not going to, give up over a hit an inning, at least hopefully not, or he won't be long for this rotation. But what you need to see, he threw a lot of uncompetitive pitches. I thought that the slider, sweeper, whatever version of it that Abel throws wasn't really effective. He was missing oftentimes against a righty in the other's batter's box. Guys just aren't going to swing at that. The velo was good for the most part. He was getting strike 1 and strike 2, but just gave up a lot of uncompetitive pitches. And then when he was in the zone, they weren't where he wanted them in the zone, and Orioles hitters did damage against them.
Yeah, and that's, common trend. I believe Mick Abel had a similar outing like that where he piggybacked off of somebody and he didn't pitch well. He just kind of spiraled where he couldn't finish hitters like today's game was. But, overall, it's not necessarily panicking about it. It wasn't a great outing, but that doesn't mean that you have to immediately give up on the guy, because he's still young. He's going to get chances to fully start, so maybe he'll be in a rhythm right away, to get in a rhythm right away with the score 0-0 basically. But yeah, you can't say, I wouldn't say, a couple of us in our DMs, in our group chat said that Mick Abel got unlucky, and whilst I would agree most of the time, you also have to be able to finish hitters. And a couple of the hits weren't a hard hit, but you still gave up those hits, and you still need to get strike 3 on the hitter. That's the main goal. So unfortunate, but it's game 1. It's game 1 for Mick Abel. He'll bounce back eventually.
Yeah, when you give up 8 hits in 3 1/3 innings, there's going to be 1 or 2 of those that are seeing eye singles or Texas leaguers. That's just the nature of baseball. And there's nothing about 4 walks in 3 1/3 innings that's unlucky. That's just not having good command, not getting swings and misses when you need them. And there was one time, I believe there was 2 outs, and he had a hitter 0-2, and he walked the guy. That's something that simply just can't happen at all. And I believe that run did come around to score. Correct me if I'm wrong, Troy.
A run did come around. I think the only inning he didn't get allow a run was the 5th inning.
Yeah, I think you're right about that as well. On the offensive side, Royce Lewis went yard for the second time in as many days. That knotted the game back up at 5 again. That was one that just got out of that extended left field fence. I thought for a minute that the field dimensions were going to rob them again. We saw Victor Caratini hit a ball out there that was easily caught, maybe even in front of the warning track. I went on to Savant and saw that it would have been a home run in 14 of 30 parks, including Target Field and Kauffman Stadium, where the Twins are headed next. Josh Bell, as you mentioned, had a big game. He did double twice. One of those was a Sun-aided double. The center fielder, Dylan Beavers, could not see it. The ball landed about 10 to 15 feet to his left, but credit to Josh Bell. And then Derek Shelton, I want to talk about this a little bit. In the 9th inning, we saw Derek Shelton get ejected after a pitch to the aforementioned Josh Bell. It was a full count. The ball was on the inner third of the plate. It initially ruled a ball by the umpire, but the pitcher in this situation challenged the pitch. He did it almost immediately. I think what happened here was Shelton wasn't looking at the pitcher, because oftentimes managers are telling their pitchers not to challenge. The pitcher did correctly challenge. Shelton felt that the challenge was late and shouldn't have been accepted. First of all, did you think that the challenge was late, or do you think it was something that Shelton just missed? And do you like seeing Shelton go out and fight for his guys, or do you think this was kind of performative, for lack of a better word?
I think we kind of, a thing about Rocco Baldelli, the previous manager in his tenure, was that he wasn't, antsy enough about wrong calls, whether overall it was a wrong call or not. And in this situation, I kind of do like that Derek Shelton was fighting for, his side of the argument, and he ended up getting ejected. But I think it's a worthy ejection, at least, but the ABS was correct. You can't really argue what an ABS says. Although I do think that it did come in a little late. I maybe was not aware that a pitcher could also immediately challenge, because the catcher almost always does, at least in the first few games I've seen where ABS has been in effect in the big leagues. But in general, I think Shelton was justified in a way. He thought he was justified. So I think a manager sensed he was justified fighting for what he thought was a wrong call. But overall, I think it was the right call in the end. But it didn't directly end up affecting the game in either sense. So it's kind of just whatever to me. But good to see that he was fighting and eventually got ejected.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned people, complaints about Rocco not fighting enough. Rocco got ejected on a per game basis much more often than Derek Shelton did during his time in Pittsburgh. It'll be interesting to see if that holds true in Minnesota. We'll take a quick break. After the break, we'll give our series takeaways before taking a quick look around the AL Central and previewing the upcoming series in Kansas City.
And welcome back to Twins Takes. Here around, we're going to talk about our 4 main takeaways from the 3-game set this series against the Orioles. Unfortunately, Will and Folly's Mattress and Twins Insider could not make it. But I'll start off with my main takeaway is that I think the starting pitching will be the best part of this team, inconsistencies or not. I thought all 3 starting pitchers pitched okay at worst, really good at best, with Joe Ryan kind of in the middle with Taj Bradley, and then Ober had the worst start, but only give up that 1 3-run home run. And overall else, I thought he was fine, even though the velo was still down, usually from his average from a couple of years ago. And Twins Insider's takeaway was that the lineup might be better than expected, but also less athletic than he expected, given all the talk about base running. But especially with Josh Bell and Victor Caratini not being that athletic despite being on base constantly.
Yeah, and then my big takeaway was you have to keep a challenge for the late innings. We saw it make an effect today in the top of the 9th on that previously talked about Josh Bell full count, walk turned into strikeout. And then I think you need to keep one until the 8th or 9th inning. You can't be, we saw Matt Wallner kind of have an emotional challenge early in the game. Then there was not early in the game, it was midpoint of the game, but then late in the game, there was a ball that was well off the plate that a Twins hitter definitely would have challenged, but just didn't have available to them. I think you need to keep one of those for the late innings. And then Folvy's Mattress, his big takeaway was the mental mistakes made in this series, primarily today. We didn't actually talk about it. there was two big base running mistakes. Josh Bell, after that Sun-aided double, there was a ball hit to the right side to the third baseman, no outs. Josh Bell tried to advance to third base for some reason, ran out of the baseline to avoid the tag, and then the ball was thrown to first base, so it ended up being a double play. No outs, or 2 outs, no on, instead of what would have been 1 out and a guy on second base. And Byron Buxton made a rare base running mistake. He hit a double down the line, kind of a looping double. I don't know if he thought it was going to take a weird carom or what, but he rounded second base rather than just stopping on the bag and was tagged out. It was a really weird blunder by Byron. Which base running play do you think was more inexcusable, Troy?
I think it was probably the Bell mistake, given that the ball was hit towards the third baseman. Usually you're not trying to run towards third when a ball is hit towards the left side of the infield if you're on second base. So I thought Bell just should have had a better read on the ball. I don't know if he thought that the third baseman would immediately throw it, but credit to the third baseman of the Orioles who made a really smart play and was able to get the double play out of it. But, if you're Josh Bell, you just have to be better aware of if a ball is hit towards the third baseman, you're supposed to go back to the second base bag. So I thought that was inexcusable. Buxton, he did overrun the bag. That was also pretty bad, but the Twins could have had a big inning after the Bell double.
Yeah, I think the Buxton one is almost worse just because you expect him to, he's a good base runner. It was just a brain fart in the moment. I believe it was leading off an inning. I might be wrong about that. I'd have to go back and look. But regardless, both were bad mistakes, and they simply can't happen with a lineup that is going to struggle to put runs on the board. They can't afford to, give away outs on the base paths.
Yeah, the Buxton double was the third out of the inning.
Okay, that's right. Okay, so it wasn't leading off the inning, but regardless, both were bad plays, and obviously they'll be talked about by the coaching staff. Nobody's trying to make mistakes out there, but again, they just can't happen. Now let's take a quick look around the AL Central. Cleveland is 2-1. They're in Seattle playing the Mariners. They do play on Sunday Night Baseball tonight against the Mariners, so we won't know the result of that one. And then they head to LA to take on the Dodgers for a 3-game set this week.
Yeah, and then also the Tigers taking the 2-1 series win over San Diego. Kevin McConaughey, unfortunately, looks like a stud, but they'll also play 3 at Arizona starting tomorrow. And also the Kansas City Royals, the Twins' next opponent, went 1-2 in Atlanta this weekend. They had the lead 2-0 in the 9th inning last night, and Carlos Estevez just blew it, a grand slam by Dom Smith.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about Estevez real quick here, as the Royals are going to be relevant with the Twins going to Kansas City to take them on. His velo is way, way down, and like you said, he gave away that game. Do you think Royals fans should, rightfully be really worried about him?
I think the Royals fans at least know my roommate actually was really just abhorrent about what happened in last night's game. And in today's game, earlier today against the Braves, Lucas Erceg got the save, which, he probably should be the closer to begin with because he was already a really good setup guy in Oakland. And he was a setup guy last year before Estevez's velo went down. But if Erceg's velo is going to stay up, he should be the closer at least.
Yeah, hopefully we don't find out who the closer is because the Royals don't have any save situations, but I agree it's got to be Erceg at this point. And then the lowly White Sox got swept by Milwaukee in Milwaukee. They now head to Miami for a battle in the toilet bowl against the Marlins.
Sorry about that, but I should note that Munetaka Murakami, a guy that we kind of talked about a little bit in a previous podcast episode, hit 3 home runs in 3 games. He's had a nice start to his rookie season in Chicago. Maybe he's proving us doubters wrong, but it's something to note.
Yeah, I'll be curious to follow him all year, not just because there's the people that have the question marks over, his ability to hit velocity, but also because he was a realistic target for the Twins to target at the hole at first base. So he's someone I'll be keeping a close eye on. Hopefully he's not good, but I am kind of fearful at this point that he is going to be pretty good. Regardless, let's take a look at the upcoming pitching matchups for the series in Kansas City. Tomorrow afternoon, Monday, 3:10 first pitch. It is opening day for the Royals at home. Simeon Woods Richardson will get the ball. He was 7-4 last season, a 4.04 ERA, going up against the left-hander Chris Bubich, 8-7, 2.55 ERA. What are you looking for in Sim's first start of the season?
Yeah, I'm looking for him to be consistent and say hopefully with his fastball stays consistent as it did most of last year after it was down in the low 80s a couple of years ago. But overall in general, I just hope that we can get 5 to 6 innings out of SWR given the state of the pen as at the moment?
Yeah, I think that actually is the main thing I'm looking for is his ability to be efficient. We've seen the Twins starters up to this point struggle with that. Even Joe Ryan struggled with that a little bit. His pitch count climbed quicker than he would have liked. So navigating the Royals lineup that, as we talked about in the series season preview, that I think is going to be pretty good. It'll be important for him to get quick outs, limit their opportunity to get on the bases. They have Witt and Garcia who would like to cause havoc out there. And then game 2, 6:40, the first night game of the season for the Twins. And we did mention the weather for Wednesday is looking a little suspect at best. Joe Ryan gets the ball again, obviously really good last year. He's going up against Noah Cameron, who had a fantastic season last year, 9-7, 2.99 ERA. Anything that you're really looking for here in game 2 of the series?
Again, I'm just interested to see how they structure the lineup against left-handed hitters. Cameron was very good last year, but he is more of a ground ball guy. So I'm just looking for the Twins to see if they can put out a lot of power and contact at the top of their lineup against left-handed hitters. I think this is a prime opportunity for Austin Martin in the leadoff spot in game 2.
Yeah, Austin Martin is probably going to see starts in all 3 of these games, assuming that the pitchup matchups don't change. The one thing I'm curious about, Matt Wallner started the first game against lefties. It was talked about against the lefty. It was talked about on the broadcast that they're kind of just going to leave him in there regardless whether it's a lefty or righty. I'm curious whether that holds true now that, they get 3 lefties in a row. Is it just going to be him as that lefty in the lineup, or will they give Trevor Larnach? Will they give Cody Clemens? Will they give James Outman, who is the only Twin, I believe, on the roster not to start yet this season? Will one of them get in there for Matt Wallner?
I think we might see James Outman get one start. I think Byron Buxton's going to get a DH game at some point this week. So we might see Outman start in the field as their first choice defensively in center field because Buxton has started all 3 games in center. Maybe we get a Trevor Larnach start towards the bottom of the order. They've done that in the past. But it doesn't shock me that Matt Wallner is the one consistent lefty going to face lefties because he's a guy that has improved in limited at bats last year against lefties, and in the first game, and he's taken a couple of walks already this year against lefties. Trevor Rogers in game 1, so it doesn't shock me that he's the one constant. Again, maybe Larnach and Clemens get a start towards the bottom of the order, but I think it's primarily going to be one James Outman start in center.
Yeah, I'd be a little bit surprised if they're going to DH Buck against a lefty just because that does force another left-handed hitter into the lineup. And Buxton didn't DH nearly as much last year as we've seen in the past. We'll see if that changes under the leadership of Derek Shelton. And then rounding out the series, another day that could see rain in Kansas City, primarily in the morning, again, a few days before that forecast will really be sharpened. It's a 1:10 first pitch. Taj Bradley takes the ball. He was really good in his first start. Cole Reagans, who is a really promising lefty. He had the big season 2 years ago, struggled a little bit last year, 4.67 ERA in limited appearances. I'm curious to see how Bradley looks. The Royals are a lineup that don't strike out a lot, or at least didn't last year. I'm curious how he looks when the strikeout isn't there. Is he a guy that's going to be able to induce a lot of ground balls, or is he going to nibble on the edges? Is he going to give free passes away?
I think, if the strikeout isn't there for Taj, I think it's going to be a struggle for him to at least find a consistent way to get outs. He is kind of more of a ground ball pitcher, but he has given up home runs in the past in his seasons in Tampa. So I'm just wondering, if he can't get the strikeout, can he at least induce a lot of not very hard hit ground balls? That's the main goal, at least, with a hit or miss kind of pitcher like Bradley.
So now it's time to make our series predictions. Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe both of us headed into the Baltimore series correctly predicted 1-2, while Falvey's Mattress and Twins Insider predicted 2-1. So we're on the board so far. Sadly, I wish we were wrong, but I'm going to go with a 1-2. I just don't have a lot of faith that the lineup is going to do much against these good lefty starters. Simeon Woods Richardson, I'm not 100% sure what to expect. I do think they should be favored Wednesday with Joe Ryan on the mound against Noah Cameron, and then Thursday with Taj Bradley against Reagans. Reagans is really, really good. I'd be pleasantly surprised if they find a way to win with that one. What do you have for us, Troy?
Yeah, I also have a 1-2 record. I think they most likely win the middle game on Wednesday. I am interested to see how this Royals lineup can find a little bit more consistency. They did really struggle to score for a stretch in the Atlanta series. They won earlier today. But they only scored a total of, I believe it was 6 runs in 3 games, so not a ton. Kind of the same numbers the Twins. Twins obviously had a little bit more. But I'm interested to see just again also how they manage their bullpen, especially in the back end. Do they go to Urseg? Do they go back to Estevez? Do they even pitch Estevez at all? That will be interesting to see. But I think the Royals just in general have a better lineup. And I think and specifically Josh Bradley starts. They are going to struggle to find out. So I have the Twins going 1-2 against the Royals.
Falvey's Mattress also has the Twins going 1-2, while Twins Insider is taking the optimistic view on things. He has them going 2-1. I think the thing I want the most out of this series is just that they play 3 baseball games. Looking at that weather forecast, it doesn't look real promising. I think there's a chance that Wednesday's games gets banged and then they either play a doubleheader Thursday or more likely they'll shift that later on in the year. Teams don't like playing 2 real early on when pitchers are still limited.
Yeah, it wouldn't shock me if they'll postpone one of the games or move them to later in the year. Most likely, I think it's going to be Wednesday. I think there's about an 80% chance to rain on that day. So it might be rough to get all 3 games in. I hope they play all 3 games. But nonetheless, I think still regardless, if there's only 2 games this series, I think the Twins will still win one of those games heading into opening day, or their home opener against Tampa next week.
Yeah, regardless whether they win, lose, draw, I'm just glad that there's regular season baseball back on to talk about. It's fun to watch. It's fun to follow, whether they're winning or losing. We will be back Friday morning following the Kansas City series, hopefully with a full crew. Thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe wherever you're listening to us. I know that's cliche, but it really does help grow the podcast and get it in front of other viewers. And you can also follow us on Twitter at Twins Takes Pod. That's at Twins Takes Pod on Twitter for the podcast. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye, everybody. Go Twins.